Good morning all and welcome. Today I will be presenting my literature review on the effects of antagonist pre-stretching on agonist force production for ESSC13006 applied skill acquisition and movement. So without further ado, let's get started. Today we will be looking at the effects of pre-exercise stretching and its effects on performance. Starting with some basic background info, we will be taking a look at force production and the types of stretches and how they differ, as well as the specific routines and protocols of certain stretches. On this slide we will be focusing on force. Force in a biomechanical sense is found by multiplying the object's mass by its acceleration. Force is generated in the motor skills and is broken down into muscle tension, gravity, internal body reaction, and external objects. Force production in relation to muscles is what we will be focusing on primarily today, and is further broken down into agonist prime movers, agonist synergists, and antagonist muscles all contribute to the force production through muscle tension. Next we'll be looking at stretches and the types of stretches. So on the slide here we've got static stretching, dynamic stretching, and proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation. Static stretches are your isometric lengthening of the muscle fiber, so your most common being your standing quad stretch. Your dynamic stretches will be more of your leg swings, so lengthening through the range of motion, and your PNF stretches partnered stretches, so partner resisting the static stretch and pressing through that range of motion, getting a little bit deeper of a stretch. Here we have a description of a stretch, or more in-depth description. So the increased lengthening of the sarcomere within individual muscle fibers and decrease the contact between the myosin and actin, thereby altering the length-tension relationship. On this slide we will be looking at the who, what, when and why of stretches, or in this case we've got which stretches are effective, when is stretching appropriate, and why stretch. So which stretches are effective, that's what we'll be looking at today more in depth, but you've got different stretching routines are used for different activities. For example, dynamic stretches are generally followed by a general warm-up or a jog. Once the blood's pumping, so a little bit more mobile. Why is stretching appropriate? When is stretching appropriate? Sorry. So both pre and post exercise stretching is appropriate, depending, and that's also dependent on the type of stretches. Why stretch? Stretching very important for injury prevention, improve recovery, and improve performance, which we'll be looking at more in depth today. As well as that, the increase of flexibility, increase of range of motion, improve mobility and physical activity, and maintain postural alignment, as stated by the Washington State University. So a lot of good uses and good reasons to stretch right there. So that concludes the background information of this literature review. Moving on, we'll be looking at the methods involved. So with the help of PubMed, Google Scholar, and ResearchGate, I was able to look up peer reviews, articles, and so forth, to help get a better understanding of the literature, and help obviously review it and discuss it with you guys today. So while using the databases just mentioned, such as PubMed, Scholar, Google Scholar, and ResearchGate, the search strategy involved included the use of things like verse and as well as the pre, so adding these words in amongst the main context helped to narrow down my searches and really get appropriate resources to help review this literature. So the use of verse pinned the dynamic stretches against the static stretches, so getting a comparison between the two. The use of pre-exercise, so focusing on purely articles that associated pre-exercise stretching with performance, as well as force production and stretching and the association between the two there. So with the search strategies used, such as and, versus, and pre, very accurate and very relevant studies were found in relation to the topic. Right off the bat, stretching and performance, so relating and tying in the two concepts of stretching and athletes' performance, as well as that the influence of pre-exercise stretching and force production, so focusing on that specific time period of prior to exercise. Others were the effects of different warm-up stretches protocols on 20-meter sprint performance in trained rugby union players. Same again, looking at that pre-exercise period of the warm-up and the stretches involved. Another relevant and good article was acute effects of static stretches on bench press power and velocity in adolescent male athletes. So very specific, useful studies found, purely because of the search strategies used to help narrow down and filter out things that weren't needed or things that weren't relevant. From the studies mentioned and seen in the previous slides, there were mixed results, with Janet, Raymond and Delic reporting that static stretches were insufficient prior to a vertical jump compared to a general warm-up and a handful of practice jumps. Other studies by Nelson and Serratas reported that static stretches also hindered sprint performance, whereas Fletcher and Jones found that 20-minute sprint times improved following static stretches. Fletcher and Anns in 2007 reported improved time were accompanied by dynamic stretches. So once again, seeing that there are mixed results across the board. Another study relevant to bench press power and velocity stated that static stretches had a detrimental effect on muscular performance. So, looking further into these findings, like I said prior, very mixed results, although the findings or the articles themselves, very similar activities, all explosive, powerful movements such as your sprints or your vertical jumps. So easy to cross over, easy to compare results, but still findings were very different. For example, Citrus and versus Fletcher and Jones, so both looked at sprint times and both came out with completely different results. So there were 3 studies that associated stretching with an increase or positive effect on performance. 2 stating that static stretches were the most effective in improving physical performance, and 1 looking at dynamic stretches. The dynamic stretches results found a positive effect with the agility test, whereas the static stretches resulted in slower agility times, whereas the other 2 looked at pure sprint performance, coming out with positive effects following static stretching. So, following the positive effects on performance relative to stretching, there were also 3 studies that reported negative effects of stretching prior to physical performance and physical activity. 2 in relation to sprint times, and their sprint performance is hindered by static stretching. Another was in relation to vertical jumps. So all 3 studies reported that pre-exercise stretching hindered performance and had a negative effect on their performance and force production. In conclusion, there were very mixed results in relation to stretching and force production, but believe there is sufficient evidence to support either argument, whether to say that it hinders performance and force production, or to say that it improves performance and force production. This is evident through the multiple studies mentioned throughout. I also believe there may need to be more testing done over longer periods of time and retesting of the same participants or same athletes. The last two slides are just a list of references used throughout this lecture, this literature review. Hope you've enjoyed it, and hope to see you next time. Thank you.